David Davies from AgUnity. Welcome, David. Lovely to have you on board.
Good morning, Joanna. Please, thank you.
Welcome to SaaS Stories. So first question, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, so I grew up in a remote wheat and sheep farming area in South Australia, sort of up near the Victoria-New South Wales border. But I spent all my life working in technology and right around the world. So, from Hong Kong, and then I worked in UK for a while, and then I found the opportunity to work on a UNESCO project or actually propose a project to UNESCO, which they funded. And I spent a year traveling around West Africa in 96, 97, and then ended up in Japan, where I had a company of my own that got acquired by NASDAQ company. And then I found my way into big banking. So I worked at Goldman Sachs and then Lehman Brothers for the crash, which was quite exciting, particularly because I was running treasury technology for all over Asia. So we were basically holding the money when the music stopped. And then I was a global head at Standard Chartered, and I had another company which got acquired, and that sort of led to how we started AgUnity.
Wow, quite the story there. You're certainly a man of the world, and now you're somewhere where you're saving the world. So with that in mind, tell me the story of how you came up with the idea for AgUnity.
Well, it's a great story because it was really an accident.
They always are, aren't they?
Yeah, it doesn't happen. You don't. Things like this don't happen when you plan them. So we, as I mentioned, we had a company in Singapore, and John Freeman, who's one of the founders of AgUnity, he was the internal legal counsel in that company. That had got acquired, and we were working on some other banking technology, like back. I won't get into the details, but sort of competing with the back end of Bloomberg and Reuters. And we got invited to a conference in London, and it was FinTech for Good conference that was relevant to what we were doing at the time. I couldn't go, so I sent John along, and he's rolled up direct off a flight from China, and pulling his bag along to get his pass on the Friday before the event started the next week. And he found out there was a hackathon on the weekend. And so he's entered the hackathon because he loves them. He's actually been involved with a couple of others previously. And he calls me up. I was in Australia at the time. And he says, look, there's this really great hackathon, and there's a prize from Singularity University. And for anyone who doesn't know, Singularity is like a think tank in California, and they're the same people that are behind the X Prize, Peter Diamandis, Ray Kurzweil. So they like to do moonshot stuff. And one of the things they say is, don't try to do a project for 1 million people if you can do it for 1 billion. Think big, go, shoot for the moon. And so John and I were talking, we said, look, it has to be something really big. So and it was fintech, financial technology for good. So we tried to come up with an idea or a way that we could influence the very lowest income farmers in the world. So the 1 billion poorest people in the world, what were they lacking? What was their main problem? So fortunately, we had a bit of background in this. The company that I'd had in Japan, which got acquired back in 94, 95, something like that, that worked on the very early mobile technology. So Japan had iMode phones, which were, Docomo had beat the world to that one. And so we built a technology that connected those to networks, and we did a few things there. So we knew about this sort of how mobile phone or web browsing mobile phones can change things. We'd had experience from working with farmers cooperatives from where I grew up and how they work in a developed country. And then we had seen firsthand, John had spent a lot of time in developed markets as well, what happens in a developing country when really the fundamental impediment to most farmers is they don't trust and cooperate with each other the way we do in a developed market. And a lot of that just comes down to simple record keeping. Like if I'm a farmer, I'm not going to hand you my cocoa beans or coffee if you're the buyer unless you're paying me cash on the spot. And in developing markets, you might not always have cash, or you're not prepared for the amount that's brought in. And if so what was happening in, places like Papua New Guinea, you see farmers that would harvest cocoa beans and they'd have them ready to sell, and maybe no one would turn up and they'd just rot beside the road. Or if someone turns up, they were offering them a quarter of the price they should be because they haven't got a lot of cash, or they're promising to pay them back, and no one ever trusts them to do it. So the fundamental thing that we do with AgUnity is create a phone. There's one of them with a really simple interface that you can give to someone who's never had a phone before in their life. And it does just the things that are relevant to their business today. Don't try to get into anything elaborate like marketplace features. Just, I've got some crop, I want to hand it over, and you're going to pay me later. And we've got a record of that on the phone. It's encrypted, and then it's stored on the blockchain as a separate backup. So it means that the farmers can't, that trust, you've got a solid record keeping system, and so farmers can trust and work together. Once they do that, one of the important things, I feel I have to say it, but I really feel I shouldn't. It's that people in developed markets often think of low-income farmers in developing countries as somehow less intelligent. They're not. There's people in the villages that we work with that would be doctors or lawyers in another country. They just didn't get opportunity. So when they get that first ability to just work together and you take away that barrier, they can usually solve a lot of other things by themselves. It's just a matter of getting them in a position where they cooperate. And that's really what AgUnity does, improves trust and cooperation. And then over the years, we've evolved the platform so it does a whole lot more than that. So after we get the farmers on the platform, we step them through a whole lot of procedures, like how they can get a bank account, how they can get a loan, how they can insure their crop, how they can order things they normally wouldn't be able to get. And then on the flip side, we can start to trace commodities right from the farmer all the way through to the consumer, like we'll be doing with Fair Trade in our biggest project there.
Fantastic. Certainly a great story, and absolutely agree. I mean, intelligent people, but you've now given them the tools and the technology to be able to use that. Did you find that there was a lot of kind of education needed around how to use the tool, given that it was their first phone?
Well, that's the trick. Rather than educate the farmers, what we did was change the phone so it was simple and comprehensible. So it doesn't rely on anyone having any literacy. It's all symbols. If you want to hand over a crop, you press the blue circle. And so people who with low literacy can understand how to do that. And then we do a very in-depth training program in the field. So we send a whole team out there. They're based in, our team are based in Indonesia. They come from NGO backgrounds. So they go out and do a comprehensive training program when we onboard the farmers. But really the idea is to make it as simple as possible and not change what the farmers are already doing. If they're handing over their crop and getting a deposit, then you keep doing what they're already doing. So you're not introducing any change into their way of operating. So every time we come in, we talk to all the farmers, find out what they're comfortable doing, and we change the system to work just the way they expect it. And then you get this really easy flow into the community picks it up quickly, and you get a really good success in the first project. And one of the other interesting aspects of our business is we can't market, because these are people who are not online, don't have phones until they get ours. So you have to rely on word of mouth. So you get a good result in one village. Every village for 50 kilometers will know exactly what's happened, and they'll want the phones as well. So that's the way we grow our business.
Yeah. Good, which actually brings me to my next question. And, for all the startups listening out there, I mean, you've certainly got the experience and the background. You've got the fantastic idea, which is, where startup founders tend to find themselves. But then, how did you initially scale and grow this idea? And what would you say was the one main thing that was instrumental to your success?
Persistence, bloody-minded persistence. Because what we're doing is transformative, but it's not necessarily intuitive. Like when you say to someone in a developed market, we're going to give a farmer a free phone because it's cheaper than getting them to download an app. That takes a little bit of digesting. So a lot of the stuff we were saying and trialing, people would not reject it out of hand, but they'd be very resistant to the idea because it's not the way you work in developed markets. And the things we were doing, not necessarily meaningful for people in developed markets. So in order to get through, the 4 years that we have now and, bring people along for the ride with us, we had to be very persistent about what we were doing. We learned very early on what worked. We were very agile with changing it, but we knew we had the right program, and we had to be really stick through a lot of people saying, oh, you can't do it that way. You need to you need to collect money off the farmers' commodities. Lots of things that we learned that were different. One very interesting thing happened. We were invited by World Food Programme into a kind of an accelerator group in Germany, and they brought in Google's experts on user experience design who wanted us to completely redesign the application. And these were people that had never been to a developing country.
Yeah.
And so we had a really, we've had a few interesting incidents like that where we try to be humble and listen to advice, and we always do that. But then sometimes you have to be a little bit, look, we've been out in the field, we know the farmers, and that's the key to it. You need to really know who your consumer is and be persistent, like get a solution that works for them, and be persistent at working through everyone else who tell you you can't do it. And that, particularly in Australia, right, you do get a lot of people that say, oh, this won't work. So you kind of have to be bigger than that, like, believe in what you're doing and push through any resistance you get.
Absolutely. I can 100% agree. Persistence and just believing in yourself and following your gut instincts as well. I mean, even though the experts are saying this, you know your audience a lot better than them. So definitely. So what's next for AgUnity? What is your one key objective in the near future? I mean, I don't want to go too far, like 10 years, but maybe in the next 3 years, if we can imagine a post-COVID world.
One of the things we're really keen to do is enable better transparency of products from origin to consumers. One of and we're working with Fairtrade and a couple of other organisations, but I will single out Fairtrade because they're leagues ahead of anyone at the moment. There's a real problem that if you pick up a bag of coffee from from a supermarket shelf in Australia, it can have all sorts of labels on it that say it's sustainable or there's no child labour involved or anything like that. Most of the time, they can't validate that. So consumers are in a real, difficult situation. Anyone can stick a label on a bag of coffee and say, this is protecting the rainforest, but is it really? We know a few good organisations. So, obviously Fairtrade, Mars Corporation does really great efforts. I think they're investing $1 billion off their top line in the next 5 years to eliminate child labour within their supply chains.
Oh, good.
That's a big amount of money.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very difficult problem to solve because there is, it's very hard to stop child labour when the farmers are getting paid such a low income that they can't necessarily afford to send their kids to school. And if the kids don't help on the farm, they might not be eating. Yeah. So, let's stop child labour, but on the other hand, let's also make sure the kids can eat. And so there's very big endemic problems in the supply chains that come out of developing nations. Products like cacao, coffee, vanilla haven't really changed in price at source in the last 30 years. But you and I know how much difference we pay for a cup of coffee. Now, if we were to pay an extra 50 cents and know we were actually helping that farmer and we could see what had happened in their village and see that the children were all going to school, most people would prefer to pay the extra 50 cents per cup of coffee.
Absolutely.
And that's a real gap in the market at the moment. Like, consumers need to be able to scan a QR code on a bag of coffee, see the community it came from, and see what that company is actually doing in that community. Did the farmers get paid fairly, which is actually, in my mind, that's actually more important than the child labour, because if the farmers are paid fairly, they don't, no farmer wants their child to work on the farm. They want them to go to school, they want them to be a doctor. But if they can't afford it, they'll do that. Yeah. And so, that traceability back to origin, and we're working with a few companies on that. And that can only really be done if the farmer has got a phone and you're recording the product at source, so you know where it's all coming from. If you're collecting the data at the supply center, then anyone can be putting cocoa or coffee into that supply chain. and you don't really know what's going on at the other end of it. You have to be collecting data at the farmer level. And then a lot of the organizations we work with, I mean, one of the features to phones is we can create new applications that are like survey apps or, what did your kids do today? And if you fill that in, we'll give you a better price for your coffee. And then good organizations can actually show what's happening in the village, show that they've built schools and roads and other things that are lifting the farmers out of poverty. So we play a very important partner role with the companies that are trying to do that. And that's the most important thing in AgUnity's future. If we do that well, consumer behavior will change. Consumers will start to look, now, am I spending my money responsibly? And then if people are spending their money responsibly, that will push more emphasis to the companies that are trying to do the right thing in the developed market, which is, it's a problem of a scope that very few people can imagine. There is literally 1 billion farmers working in really abject poverty so that we can have cheap coffee.
Yeah.
That's not a right aspect of the world, and it's resolvable. You need consumers that care and companies that provide the information so consumers can care.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you raised some really interesting points there. Some I wasn't even aware of. So I think just coming back to the consumer, there definitely needs to be an education there, because I don't think a lot of us are aware that when we're buying our coffee, where is this actually coming from, and what does this mean, for somebody's life? And like you said, I think if we can solve that problem, with fair trade for the farmers, I think that would naturally take care of, a lot of other problems as well. Absolutely. How long, I mean, it's, how long is a piece of string, but do you kind of have a forecast on how many years you kind of see this change start to happen? I mean, I know we're now pretty used to using QR codes thanks to COVID, but...
Yep. And it's picking up more. The technology is picking up more in the developing world. So we're very much riding a wave where everything's falling into place that we can solve these. It's lining up to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are all set for 2030. And I think that's about the time frame that we're looking to. The world should be looking to eliminate all the things that are in the UN Sustainable Development Goals in that time frame. Poverty can be eliminated. We've seen that many times. If you organise farmers well, give them a little, create that cooperation thing, then you can put inputs into a group of farmers and you can reliably increase their income by many-fold. And that means they can lift out of poverty. And once they get a little bit of one of the funny things is, right, which the numbers are small. So you're turning a farmer that earns maybe $100 into earning $200 a month. But that's a life-changing change. It's like if we double their income, it's the same effect. Yeah. They can suddenly buy more land. They can plant more crops. They can plant a crop that'll give them better value. They can send one of their school's kids to a higher education so they can earn more money and bring it back. Little changes at the bottom make a massive difference when they're moved out at a large scale. Yeah. And that's a real key to what AgUnity wants to be. There's lots of companies that do a project in a discrete area and do really well at it. Our ambition is to be a platform that extends across millions and potentially hundreds of millions of farmers around the world, because you really want to make a massive change on this. You have to do it at a big scale. And so that's what we've been designed to be, a solution that can be rolled across many, many industries, many countries, and provide that one step in enabling farmers to lift themselves to a better life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a decade certainly a good time frame. I heard a very interesting quote, which I think is very true. It's we overestimate what we can achieve in 1 year, but we completely underestimate what we can achieve in 10. So I'm sure by 2030, we're going to see some amazing things. Just coming back to AgUnity, I think, in the 4 years that you've been running, what would you say have been your biggest challenges and pain points? Well, has it been on the farmer side, or has it actually been on, the technology side? And Everything that comes with starting a startup.
Yeah, look, apart from being in like, a couple of dangerous situations, because, we are literally in developing markets at the end of side. So we've had some people exposed to danger. We don't really have issues on the farmer side. And that's a lesson that I think any startup should be aware of. If you spend enough time with your consumers, you'll develop the right product. If you're listening to what they want, a lot of people design thing in a vacuum and then try to push it out to market. If you're spending time with the consumers, and we did that for a lot. I mean, to John's incredible credit, he spent a whole year living in a house in Kenya with no proper floor, housing under a shower and under a hose, and he's a lawyer too, which is best thing to do to your lawyer. Best thing to do when you start a company: send a lawyer to live in the jungle for a year.
Absolutely.
But yeah, like he was having dinner with the farmers almost every night, and so they would tell him stuff. And one of the unique challenges with designing this solution is because they are of a low, income, they don't have a lot of confidence to tell you what's wrong. We could put out a solution that completely didn't work, and they would be very reluctant to tell us what was wrong with it. So you kind of have to give them something and then watch what happens. A lot of interaction with the farmers. So we never really had problem with that side. What we did have a challenge with was people in developed markets understanding what we were doing and buying into the story and the plan. Like, why would you give farmers homes? Well, it's actually cheaper. Why does recording transactions make such a difference to them? Well, if you saw what's going on in their environment, you completely understand. Why can't they just get these things? So we got a lot of those questions. So for the first 4 years, it took a lot of our investors and backers and that took a big leap of faith. And because, things are seasonal, it took us a long time to get it all proven and working out. Now we've kind of hit our full stride where we've got, I think we're in 9 countries at the moment, and we'll have another 5 in the next couple of months. So we've proved it in multiple locations around the world. We've proved it in different demographics, and the whole parts of the ecosystem we've got strong evidence. But when you're trying to do something new and revolutionary like that, and that's really important to startup founders, if you're trying to break the wheel and build something new and better on a really ambitious scale, most people will tell you it can't be done because they're looking for Uber for farmers.
Yeah.
Something that they can say, okay, yeah, that worked somewhere else and you're just taking it and doing the same thing. We were never wanting to be that because nothing like what we did existed in the market. So when you're trying to be very big and ambitious, it's really hard to keep people along for the ride. And we were extremely fortunate that we'd sold the company. So John and I were quite comfortable and we could spend a lot of our own time investing. And then we had a brilliant person, Philia Wong from Hong Kong, who had her own VC firm, and she's a real estate billionaire in Hong Kong. And she saw us at an event like 3 months after we started, and she invested $250,000, which really, got us to do the initial projects. We couldn't have achieved it without that. Mm-hmm. But she just had blind faith that it was a good story and we'd figure out how to do it. And that's really rare. And that's probably what is a little bit lacking in the impact investment community. People like Ophelia that go, sounds good, I'll trust it, and I'm willing to lose $250,000 if it doesn't work. But on the upside, that if it does work, it's going to turn out to be a really, really big investment.
Yeah. And for a good cause as well. And I think, those people are definitely rare, the ones that take that kind of risk and leap of faith. But just coming back to these investors, I'm kind of amazed and shocked that, they didn't want to invest in a project like this because it is such a world-changing, initiative, and it's, I can definitely see the benefits of it. Is it because people are kind of short-sighted? They think they want, quick return on investment, or do they just simply not believe in impact investing?
I think there's a lot of belief in impact investing, but it's there's 2 aspects that are important to cover. So firstly, there's a lot of people that believe in impact investing, but they look at it with a slightly different lens. A lot of people look at impact investing like, I'm going to build a school or help a village, and it's on a small scale. And a lot of impact companies then, they get in the mindset that I'll operate on that scale. When people are thinking big, ambitious, world-changing stuff, that tends to, you kind of balancing everything. The impact investors are kind of tend to look small, reliable, low returns over a long time, which is not what we're saying. And then the VCs are looking for a different turn on events and might not necessarily steer your company the way you want it to go. So there's an interesting gap there. Like, there probably needs to be more investors that are real investors, but give a slight benefit, give a slight weight to a project having positive impact on the world. I think there's a hybrid scenario in there that is underserviced, like good, ambitious companies that require a little bit more, a little bit of risk taking, like more Silicon Valley style investors, but that they're doing something good. So they're given a little bit more leeway than on their model than what traditional VCs would expect.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think impact investing has evolved over the years, or is it still something that's quite...
Yeah, just in the 4 years that we've been, really doing this, there's a massive increase in interest in impact investment. And I think that they're just getting to the point where they're really understanding what they're doing. And the issue really comes down to, and this is easy for me, having worked in banking a long time, it's really a risk appetite. Like, impact investors are looking for a very low risk, low return investment. But that means some of the most ambitious changing projects, and we are a part of a number of group, we were accepted, well, we won the Global Agripreneur of the Year, so we're a part of a big cohort of 100 similar companies. We're part of the Expo Live program, which is another couple of hundred Agro. So we know a lot of companies in this space. And I see great companies all the time that are really ambitious, can influence millions of people, just can't find investors with the risk appetite. If they were a fintech company in Silicon Valley, they'd get snapped up right away. They'd have people fighting over. And because they're doing it in Africa, people are a little bit more hesitant to put money into what is probably an even better opportunity than the one you would have had in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there definitely needs to be some education to investors there.
I think it's happening. I think we're on a path where impact investing is becoming more mainstream. More VCs are saying that, out of this, they might have $100 million fund and 20 million of that has to have an impact flavor. But then they still have probably a little bit risk adverse on those investments. And that's really what you've got to take. Like, impact investments should be the riskiest ones, because then you're changing into a new market. That's where the risk exists, but it's also where the big returns exist, and that's what investors should be looking for.
Exactly. No, thank you for that. Just coming back to COVID-19, I know people are really sick of talking about it, by this time of year. But one question I absolutely love to ask is, what has been your biggest learning from it?
So we saw that it was going to change a lot of things. I mean, we're very cognizant of diseases because of where we work. So our whole company is very, careful about these things. And when we saw COVID first coming out, we closed the office. We moved people back from locations where we couldn't necessarily relocate them easily. And we remobilized to turn the company to very online, shut our offices. So we did all that in February. And then immediately at that, we started looking at what other problems that COVID would bring that we could help solve. Now, I personally believe that the deaths from the disease might actually be eclipsed by the deaths from other causes in most developing countries. I think the food supply chains are being horrendously disrupted, and we're not going to see the long-term impact of that. Child malnutrition takes years to advance. Foods, when you have to shut down a country, like what India is going through at the moment, when you have to shut down regions of country and food stops moving around, the more wealthy people, food still gets to the supermarkets. They have reliable supply chains. The informal supply chains of food and the other economic disruption to the people in those supply chains will take decades to recover from. And that will have a huge economic and humanitarian impact. So our first thought when COVID came along is what have we got that can help that problem? So we started to work on what we call our COVID response, which was we set up as a separate company, and we got a lot of people, working for equity in that company. So it allowed us to mobilize really quickly. And we thought that the major problem in developing markets, because we're there so often, is the food market. So if you go to a developing country, you'll see these big sprawling markets where people from all the small villages, they bring in their fish or grocery, vegetables or whatever, and they're all sitting in a big crowded market and selling it, and then they go back to their village at night.
Yeah.
Absolute worst vector for virus spread. But how do you stop a food? If you stop the food market, then that's the food that the not wealthy people in the cities, in the urban areas are eating. And that's how the farmers make their income. You shut that down and you've got a much more serious problem than the virus. So our model was to enable farmers to, get a phone, to be able to say, I've got some taros and some yams and some tomatoes, and I need someone to come into the village and collect them. Tell me in advance if you're going to give me a fair price, and then take them and put them in the food supply chain. So we put out the proposal in a number of countries. New Guinea's verbally accepted it in a press conference, so we're pretty confident they'll go ahead for one region. And Uganda has agreed to that as well, sponsored by CASA, which is part of the UK Department of Foreign Affairs. Yeah. So we've got 2 of those projects running, and we've got about 5 others that we've proposed to national government. So I'm optimistic that Trade Investment Queensland has opened up the potential for us to do that in Sudan, which is a big opportunity, and hopefully we can play our role in keeping some food supply chain moving. And I think the point of what I'm saying is that while COVID is devastating, it creates 2 things. It's things that people must be doing. Like, you've got to look at what you already do and how you can help make COVID less bad for other people. So it doesn't matter what your company is, you can craft it so it helps in some way. And then it's also an opportunity to go into new markets. So once we get into, we wouldn't have been in Uganda otherwise. And when COVID finishes, we'll have probably tens of thousands of farmers in Uganda as a result of helping them get through COVID. And we'll turn those into cooperatives, and then we'll turn that into a much more resilient and sustainable agricultural system in Uganda. So these are COVID initiative projects that will have long-lasting benefits for the countries. And one of the important things is lots of countries actually have funds for COVID relief at the moment. So countries like New Guinea can do things now that they would normally have not had funding for. So it's a really important time for people to say, like, while we're keeping things moving from COVID, let's fix some bigger issues in our supply chain at the same time.
Okay, yeah. I mean, COVID's certainly a crisis, but it's also created, a lot of opportunities for a lot of organizations and countries. So it's good to hear that, you've been able to help, these initiatives and so many more farmers in these countries. Do you have plans to extend past those countries, or are you just focused on them and spreading the word within them?
No, one of our key objectives is to get AgUnity. So we have a bit of a long growth pattern, again, which is why investors sort of struggle with us, because we get an initial group of farmers, but then once we've got them, they're never going to leave, because really they're all part of a cooperative. For one farmer to leave, the whole cooperative really has to leave. Yeah. So we have a really solid position, and other cooperatives will want to copy them and join it. But this is typically seasonal. So you start one project, you do about 100 farmers. The next year you can grow that to about 1,000. The next year you can grow that into the thousands. But it takes many, many, many years. So for AgUnity to be successful as a global technology platform for farmers, we need to start off in as many countries with as many commodity groups as possible as we can now, because otherwise we won't be, it'll be 5 years later before we get to a country like Uganda. So yeah. And that's, last year we had quite a lot of revenue. We didn't need to raise investment. this year we're back to doing a Series A round, only because we can go into probably 20 countries in next year if we're well enough funded. And 5 years down the track, those countries will have tens or hundreds of thousands of farmers that we're helping. And likewise, that also means we become a very significant organisation able to do a lot of good because of that scale.
And I suppose just on that as well, is there going to be an opportunity, for the everyday person to be able to help AgUnity? Will there be crowdfunding opportunities in the future, or is it just for investors?
No, we did look at doing a crowdfunding last year, and it was very unfortunate timing. It ran right into the bushfires, and then COVID started, and so we stalled it, and then we stalled it again, and then we just went straight to investors. So we were trying to do that, and specifically for that reason, to allow everyday people to invest in AgUnity. But natural disasters and things, we got our timing bad.
Yeah, it has certainly been a year, hasn't it?
Oh yeah. It's interesting. You look back on this year and you can hardly remember the bushfires, and it was one of the greatest disasters in Australia. It's been a long year. Late last year we were looking at that, and it got stalled, and then we went the normal path. And I think though AgUnity will ultimately, it's a great story for a public company. And my previous companies were both acquired. I would normally, as a founder, assume that a trade sale or something like that's the exit. I think AgUnity is something we want to continue forever, and I think it makes a good ongoing public company. So I'm hoping that in a number of years we'll be publicly listed somewhere and allow people to participate. We do need to look for another mechanism where people can participate, and we are working on a few models for that. And one in particular, I think it's more important than, we'll get investment, we're fine. What's actually more important is investing in some of the communities we work with. And there are genuinely good opportunities, like, in cocoa industry, for example, there's lots of small villages that if they set up a bit of a processing facility, they could get much higher prices for their cocoa. And they often only need like $5,000 to $10,000 to set up some drying facilities, some fermentation boxes, and a shipping container to put it in. And that village can roughly double their income. And pay back a loan from someone or a co-investment and stuff. So one of the things we've been trying to facilitate, and we've been looking at a couple of mechanisms to do this, is a way that people can use our network of farmers to make direct investments into communities that are much more hands-on than you would ever be able to do through any organisation. So that's one thing we're hoping to start to be able to facilitate within 2021. It's quite complicated to do it, but there's a few means we can do that.
Okay, no, that's really good to hear. I'm sure, definitely bad timing at the start of this year, but it's such a good story and such a good mission that I'm sure the crowd will get behind you. And I think more people will want to help for sure.
I'd very much encourage, it's very worth following what we're doing, because we do see these opportunities like the village and stuff. And it's just great to follow it. Like whether you're investing or not or participating now, it's just really interesting to see what can be done, because it gives people a new insight. And it's easy when you're in a developed country to be dismissive of the people in poverty as, they're taking money from society. They can change their own situation very quickly and easily. And by understanding how quickly that can be changed, it gives people a lot more empathy to their situation, that they're just a little bit far from it. But more importantly than that, when you take a person from abject poverty to having a slight surplus, they're also contributing to the global economy. They're making things better for everyone else in the world. They're making better coffee, better chocolate. There's actual benefits to us in the long term from seeing people change, seeing people at the bottom of the pyramid changing their lives for the better. They're no longer a drag of society. We're no longer, AusAid no longer needs to give money to New Guinea, because New Guinea's actually got a thriving agricultural economy, which I genuinely think they can do in the next few years.
Oh, absolutely, I 100% agree with that. And I'm just going to ask, for all the startup founders listening out there, what advice would you have for the ones that are looking to make a difference in the world?
Okay, so firstly, get really close to the people you're trying to make the difference to. Like, all the best startups I see are ones where people intimately understand their users. Like, again, with Expo Live, we're working with people that are working with disability, people that are working with, specific ethnic groups. If they're close to that group and they understand the problem, and you listen to them without putting your own, preconceptions on it, you'll solve the right problem. If you solve the right problem, then it's persistence from your point. You need to be confident to tell to your investors and backers, look, we are going to make this succeed. We've had so many up downs in AgUnity, we push through them every time. You've got to be saying that, look, I'm going to battle at this for 3 years until I get it right. So if you get the users correct, and then you're confident with your investors, eventually, they'll jump on board, and eventually you'll make a success. But it's all, nothing comes easy when dealing in these markets with ground changing things. It's a hard slog, but a massive global problem. So there's huge amounts of opportunity out there.
Yeah. I mean, definitely changing the mindset of the world can be tough. So yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, David, thank you so much for coming on and telling your story to SaaS Stories. I really appreciate it. I think it's, just a fantastic story that you have. I'd love to get the message out there. And yeah, it's been really nice listening to you. I am going to leave you with one last question, because I absolutely love asking this question, especially people like you that are out there changing the world and doing these incredible things. So, what gets you out of bed in the morning, and what inspires you?
Oh, that's easy. So, just AgUnity itself is, we meet the farmers, and I, prior to COVID travel restrictions, I spent a lot of time in the villages myself, because it's so important to meet the people you're changing their lives. And, the memories of them, of what they say to you, how much you've helped them, seeing their villages changing, seeing, changes, those memories don't fade even for years. And so we're inspired by the fact that we are changing people's lives. And also, I think I can speak for everyone in our company, and there's well over 40 people now in the company. They're all doing this because they want to be part of something that they'll tell their grandchildren about. I was one of the early people in AgUnity. We did this and we changed millions of people's lives. And whatever else you did in your life, what your legacy is and what you can tell to other people. So I think that's the most important thing you can do with life. All the money in the world. Like, again, I worked in investment banking in Goldman and Lehman, where a lot of people earn ridiculous amounts of money. They're not happier.
No.
Having all the wealth in the world, if you're working in an investment bank doing a job that doesn't really help anyone, does not make you happy. Working in a company where you're changing things for the better, that's life inspiring. That's what gets anyone up in the morning.
Absolutely. I don't think money has ever been a motivating factor. And even if people think that's wrong, they just kind of have to live in that stressful environment for a few weeks just to have their minds change. But I know there's a lot of books out there written about this very thing, what has created a happy life. It's definitely not money. It's it's families, it's making a difference, feeling useful, making a change. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool, and that's what we're all about. So I think, again, it's not just me. I can tell you that all of our company literally jump out of bed in the morning because they feel they're doing something that's incredibly meaningful.
Absolutely. So good to hear. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. I have just stopped recording, actually.